Here we go. Good evening and welcome to the 535th episode of Travel Itch Radio. I'm Dan Schlossberg and we are in the 13th season of Travel Itch, the show that lets you enjoy the pleasures of travel through the comfort of your armchair.
Every week at this time, we talk to people representing destinations, hotels, airlines, railroads, car rental companies, and others in the world of travel and hospitality. From authors and bloggers to broadcasters and publicists, if it's got anything to do with travel, it's got everything to do with Travel Itch Radio.
And our guest tonight is Norm Bour, veteran travel writer and author, and one of the most well-traveled people I know. Welcome, Norm, to Travel Itch Radio.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and kudos to both of you. 500 shows. That is extraordinary, gentlemen. That is a landmark for sure.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for getting up early. You are in Vietnam and you are what, 12 hours away from us?
Yes, I'm going to pull a little Robin Williams here and say, good morning, Vietnam.
My favorite movie. I loved it.
Yeah, it's 5 a.m. my time.
You sent me my first email from Vietnam last week. You really do get around. I think you visited at least one country for every star in the American flag. Are you keeping count?
I am keeping count because I'm a numbers guy. I'm a little bit anal retentive in that respect. And so collectively, from the very beginning, before we started our journey, I've been to 52 different countries. And then since we left, we've been to 42 different countries. So here we are recording this on the 9th of February, and we left the 17th of February. So in 5 years, we've hit 42 countries and 6 continents. The only place we have not been to the Antarctica.
Well, you're certainly one of the most well-traveled people on the planet, but please tell our audience where you live when you're quote-unquote home and how you manage to spend so much time on the road.
Well, that's an interesting question because when people say, where do you live? I say, well, the truth is we don't really have a home. I'm originally from Philadelphia and I spent 40 years in California. So California is, for the most part, my adapted home. But my wife and I left in 2019, and we don't really have a home. We got rid of everything that we had. We got rid of our property. We got rid of our cars. And so my home is wherever we are at that time. Now, with that being said, there are a few countries that we really like that we consider to be quote unquote, air quotes, home. Like we really love Croatia, and we really love a country that we just recently visited, Bali. And we look to those as being very comforting, very home-like. But everything that we have is pretty much in 4 different backpacks that we carry with us. Although we have a couple of hideaways. We have a backpack in Turkey, which has some cold weather clothes because we try to avoid cold weather. And in Albania, we have another bag that has kitchenware because we were there for 9 months. And so we outfitted the kitchen. And because we're motorcycle riders, I have a motorcycle bag in Bucharest, Romania, because for the last couple of years, we've rented a motorcycle there for a couple of months. So I keep my helmets there and my jackets there and my gloves there and all that. So we carry only what we have to. And guys, I have to tell you, when you really drill it down to how much you really need in life to make you happy, it really ain't that much.
Do you write as you go, or do you take notes and do interviews?
I write as I go. I started a blog the day we left California. I'm sitting there at Los Angeles airport thinking, all right, so here I am sitting at LA, planning to leave the country that I've lived in for the last 62 years without the intention of coming back. And so I started a blog, and I've done 193 of them so far, and I turned them into a book, which is called Nomadic Travel for All Ages. And then along the course of the way, I meet people, I meet other nomads, I meet other experts. I'm a teacher, but I'm also a student because we learn a lot from fellow people who have done and are doing what we do. And I write for a magazine and a website called International Living, along with 2 others called Matador Travel and Travel Awaits. And so that is supplemental income for me, in addition to my Social Security, which mostly sustains us.
I know from personal experience that print publications, especially in travel, are shrinking or disappearing. So tell us where we can still find your work.
Well, you can always go to my website, which is travelyounger.com. But if you go to internationaltravel.com, that's a magazine that's been around for about 20 years, and it's geared towards what we call expats. Expats are people who either want to move outside their home country or who want to spend more time outside their home country, and they actually have a hard copy magazine. So I actually write for their hard copy magazine, and I also write for their online magazine. So, but if you Google my name, which is right there on the screen, and you'll find several references. I've written for magazines in Croatia and Romania and different countries just periodically whenever I'm able to get my foot in the door. But you bring up a good point, Dan, and that is the travel writing industry. The journalism industry has really taken a beating because everything is online and now you've got AI taking over.
And people that are viewing this see that travelyounger.com. That's kind of a misnomer, or is it not?
It is not a misnomer. All right, so here's the short story. I'm 69. I know I don't look a day over 68, but I never really traveled. I never really traveled internationally until I was like 62 years old, and I went to Europe for 3 weeks on a business trip, and I was blown away by how people live in Europe compared to the way that we lived in the United States, and I was especially intrigued by the younger people, the younger ones being the millennials who made it look so effortless. Now, granted, for them, country borders are the same as state borders for us in the U.S., so they can traverse three different countries within a couple of hours if need be. But yet they were able to handle currency and customs and different languages and everything, and in and out of subways and trams and everything. And I'm like, I'm a deer in the headlight, guys. I'm totally freaked out because this is all so foreign to me. And I said, I need to learn how these young people do it because they make it look so fun and so effortless. And so when I went back to Newport Beach, California, I had lunch with a friend of mine who was a fellow writer who was a millennial. And she said, I hook up with this website, and whenever I see a trip that's too good to avoid, I take it, I figure out how I'm going to do it, and then I work my way through it. And so that's what I did. So I started looking for these travel deals that were too good to avoid. And I started traveling. And then 2 years later, I met my wife and we started traveling together. We actually went on our first international trip within 8 weeks after our first date. So we've pretty much been on the road almost all of our 6+ years together.
And we're talking to travel writer Norm Bauer, who got up early in Vietnam and has a raspy voice, but he's still great to have on the air.
Thank you,
Roger?
guys.
You may have mentioned this a bit, but do you get assignments before you hit the road, or do you go and look for places to publish afterward?
A little bit of both. A little bit of both. It takes a while to build relationships in anything, life, business, what have you. And so, like with the magazines that I write for, I will let them know where I'm going, and I will pitch them on it, such as, "Hey, I'm going to be doing a trip to such and such. Is this something that you'd be interested in?" Like for instance, we just did what they call a repositioning cruise, which is a one-way cruise that took us from Hawaii to Sydney, Australia, over 18 days. So I put a wide blanket out there, and I pitch everyone, and then I see who's interested, and then I will write a different story for each of them if there's more than one, and I will tailor make it to them, and I'll share our experiences. So some I pitch in advance. Sometimes it happens after the fact, depending upon maybe my experiences from that particular place or event.
Do you prefer press trips or independent travel?
We really only do independent travel. Press trips are impractical in my situation because if I was in the United States, there would be press trips to different destinations within the domestic United States. But because I'm kind of like out here as a solo traveler, as a solo writer, there's really no such thing. However, with that being said, I am able to barter some visitations. Like, for instance, we just stayed in two beautiful, luxurious locations in a town called Can Tho, Vietnam. And we were blessed with two beautiful nights in one resort and two beautiful nights in another resort. And in exchange, I gave them some marketing information. And we did the same thing in Australia. We actually stayed, this is one of the highlights of our trip, guys. So in Australia, in the capital of Canberra, is an animal park called Jamala Animal Park. And it's one of those parks where you actually sleep in a bungalow with wild animals right outside your door. So we're in this bungalow in what they call the giraffe treehouse, and so we get there and there's the giraffes right outside our window, and they come over and they bring some carrots and everything, and then in the morning we wake up and there they are, and so we were gifted that trip along with we had a chance to sit with a little enclave of cheetahs, and we got to play with some meerkats, and we had a really luxurious dinner. So that was something that I wrote about, but I was also able to barter the trip in exchange for giving them some marketing, and so it's a win-win for both. I always wanted to make sure that everything is fair compensation. I never look for something for nothing. I always want to try to give back if at all possible.
You may have already answered the $64,000 question, but who pays for your trips? I know many newspaper travel editors, for example, won't accept stories from sponsored trips, and
Yeah,
for obvious reasons.
yeah. It hasn't been an issue so far. No one pays for my trips, but what they do is they give me free visitation. In other words, no one's paid for any airfare, train fare, bus fare, you name it. But what they'll do is they'll give me a free room, which doesn't cost them that much. Um, but you're absolutely right. If you go on a lot of press trips, they don't want to do it because then they feel your report is going to be slanted or adjusted towards the advantage of the resort. But so far,
Yeah.
it's not been an issue, and I know it's changed. I mean, if you look back at the travel industry 20 years ago, travel agents were traveling all over the world, getting
Mhm.
freebies here, there, and everywhere, and that was just part of the business. But it's not that way anymore.
All right, Norm, tell us, what are your favorite and least favorite countries and why, if I may ask, or be so bold?
Roger, congratulations. That is the number one question that we do get asked. I'm going to be doing a story called "The Questions That We Always Get Asked," and that's the number one. What is our favorite country? So when we first left the United States, we went to Spain and then we went to Italy, which are part of the European Union or what is collectively called the Schengen region. Now, a lot of people who are listening to this may not be familiar with the Schengen region, but it's basically a collection of 28 different countries that operate under one passport control. So that if you are in one country, it's the equivalent of being in all countries. So after 90 days, you got to get the hell out of town. So at that time, we had to leave Italy and we went to Croatia, which was a country that neither of us knew very much about, but we fell in love with Croatia. We have been there four different times.
Wow.
We have traveled from the north to the south on scooters and on motorcycles, and it's got a magnificent coastline. So Croatia is very, very high on our list. We were in Turkey for about 8 months, and when we were there,
Wow.
it was before the war, and Turkey was amazingly cheap. So here's the thing. One of the other questions we get in addition to what's your favorite country is how do you afford to do it? Well, the truth is that some of the cost of livings and the cost of traveling in these distant countries is far less expensive than staying at my property in California. We
Yes.
had a really lovely apartment hotel in this town called Antalya, Turkey, that was right at the Mediterranean. I mean, guys, we could walk down the street, not even 5, 7 minutes, and there is the Mediterranean just strewn out in front of us. And we were paying about $500 a month.
Wow.
And then we could also have breakfast for like $5 a day, too.
Oh, cut it out.
Yeah, man.
Jeez.
It
It,
doesn't
it,
suck. It's what
yeah.
makes me look so young. It's what makes me look so young.
And I am envious because of that. Now, we are receiving questions in the chat room, folks, and we would like to get to them. So please keep firing them away in the chat room, and Dan will be able to get to them. Now, let me ask, in a difficult world dominated by politics, do you ever find yourself the ugly American?
Um, The answer is no, not really, but there's a little bit of an irony here. The one place that we felt a little uncomfortable was in the country we're in right now, and that's Vietnam. Four
Oh,
years ago, we went to North Vietnam. We were in a town called Ha Long Bay.
Mm-hmm.
And in the north part of Vietnam, of course, that's where so much of the fighting took place during what we call the Vietnam War. They call the American War. Of course, their view is a little different than ours. I just went to the War Remembrance Museum
Yeah.
in Saigon, and it's called the American War. And I won't go into all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, but it wasn't a very favorable museum. It was very, very soul touching at the same time. But when we were up north, we went to like a marketplace, and this woman just gave us a look. She's like daggers in her eyes. And it's like, we didn't do anything. We didn't say anything, but we obviously look like Westerners and possibly Americans. People don't always know that we're Americans. Some people think we're German or Dutch or whatever. And so we went back to our room, which was hosted by a lovely older couple. They were both former educators. And we told them what happened. She said, you have to understand, 50 years ago, a lot of the people here lost their entire family, not just one son, but multiple sons. And all they heard is what they heard. They heard the war propaganda. So to them, we were the ugly Americans who were coming in to invade and kill their children. And so this country is the only one that made us feel uncomfortable. But with that being said, there are other countries that I feel uncomfortable in. Like, for instance, we spent enough time in Latin America that if I don't go back to Latin America, I'm not going to miss it because the vibe there is just different than it is in Europe and everything. Yeah, for us, I can't speak for the rest of the world. Of course, some people love Mexico. We were stuck in Mexico during COVID, but some people
Hmm.
love Mexico and Central and South America. But for us, my mother was Hungarian, so my heart is in Eastern Europe. And now the reason that we're here in Asia is we're trying to find out, are there places over here that we could hang for 90 days at a time? Because that's a typical visa timetable. And we aren't looking for a second home, although as we age, we realize that we can't do this forever. We realize that at some point in time, we're going to have to stop traveling or travel a lot less.
Wow. Appreciate that. Now, I speak English, Spanish, and Klingon really helps me get everywhere, but that's neither here nor there. How many languages do you speak, and is the language barrier your biggest difficulty during your travels?
Klaatu, Narada, Nikto. I'm sorry, I'm not very good in my Klingon. My Klingon's a little bit rusty on me, but I can
Galaxy
barely hand.
Quest.
I, actually going back further. It's actually going back to the day the Earth stood still. You nerd, I can tell.
Oh my God. Oh, I am sorry.
There you go, Michael Rennie, classic. English is it, and the truth is that I've never had an affinity for languages. I took German in high school and I sucked at it. And when we lived in Mexico during COVID, I diligently tried for several weeks. I mean, I really gave it my all on Duolingo, which is a great language app. And the truth is, I really didn't have a desire to do it. I felt that I had to do it or I should do it in order to communicate, but it wasn't like a passion for me. And unless you have a passion for something, like I can't not write, I have a passion
Mhm.
for it. You guys have a passion for radio. You can't not do radio. We all have a passion for something. So unless you really feel compelled to want to learn that language, or unless you're younger, I mean, my 69-year-old brain is not what it was, 40 years ago. And so we just don't have the capacity. At least I don't have the capacity to do the language thing anymore.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to travel writer Norm Bauer.
Norm, you obviously go to third world countries in your travels. Is poverty as big a problem as always, or is it growing as the world population increases?
That's a really good question, Dan. I don't really have a basis of comparison. We've been to several third world countries and several what you would call economically challenged or developing nations. The one country, all right, so in Asia, of course, or not of course, because people may or may not know, they don't necessarily honor or respect their environment. When we were in Thailand 4 years ago, we were in Bangkok and we spent 2 months there, and the streets are horribly dirty. The canals are littered and they're full of muck. When we went to Egypt, which was exactly a year ago, same thing. It's like the beautiful Nile River and all the tributaries off of it are all just clogged with muck and everything. So poverty is a real thing. Now, is it worse than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago? I can't answer that question, which brings up the one country that has been probably the most contentious one. Pardon me. The most contentious one that we have to decide on, and that's India. Because India, if you picture India, the first thing that comes to mind in many people's case after the Taj Mahal is poverty. The people are very poor. They're happy, but unfortunately, everyone is broke with a highly, highly dense population. And so we go back and forth about whether we even want to go to India, whether the benefits are worth some of the uncomfortableness when you see all that poverty, you see the people suffering around you. So we haven't really reached that conclusion yet, but we're inclined to go, yes, we will go to India.
And with so many insurgencies going on around the world, have you ever been to a war zone, and how did you handle it?
No, no, we are very spiritual, very blessed people in regard to the fact that we look at what the State Department says as far as warnings, but we don't give it a lot of credibility because they're always very, very cautious. We learned this when we went to Tunisia, which was our first African and our first Muslim country, and that was 4 years ago. And according to the State Department, they said, don't go there. Well, if you read the fine print, they say, don't go to the southern border because that's where Libya is causing some problems down there. So, as it was, we went to the capital, which is Tunis, and it was our first Muslim country. It was the first time we had to listen to what they call the call to prayer, which
Yes.
is the mosques where they do the alarms or the chants 5 times a day. And the people were lovely. We've lived in several Muslim countries, including Turkey, for a long time, and the people, it's really a shame. I'm not going to get political here, but Muslims as a religion, as a culture, have gotten a bad, bad rap. And the truth is that they're very, very peaceful people, very, very giving people. When we went to Tunisia, we took a ferry, an overnight ferry from Italy. People sitting in the hallway were the mother, the father, the kid. They're eating some food, and they're like, "Please have some food, have some food, have some food." And it's like we took some food just to be polite, but what little they have, they give, and they're very sharing, and they're very
Wow.
appreciative of what God gave them. And I think that's a very respectable way to live your life. In Bali, where we just came from, it's a relatively poor country, although tourism, of course, is a big booster. But if you walk down the street, there's prayer offerings. Every driveway, every building has these little square, maybe 4, 5, 6 inch square little pieces of bamboo, and they have flowers in it, and they have incense in it, and sometimes they have some food or some fruit in it, and they put this out as an offering. And so I asked one of my friends there, these people are poor. I mean, can they really afford this? They said, well, we believe that if we give what we have, we will get abundance in return. So, you got to treasure that, guys.
Yes.
As a fan of the late Anthony Bourdain, I've always admired the fact that he would eat anything, anywhere, even if it moved. Do you have an American palate, or are you willing to follow the adventuresome Anthony Bourdain example?
As much as I would love to say that we are adventurous foodies, no, we are chickens. We are big time chickens. We love our Western palate. Um, Asia is particularly challenging for us because you'll go into a food market down on the street, and they'll have every conceivable type of mollusk and crab and frog and squid and octopus and all these amazing seafoods, but they are so, again, I'm only speaking for me, but for me, it's extraordinarily challenging. I mean, I love calamari, but I want it fried. God damn it, it's like I
Yes.
don't want to be eating it so it's still squishy and still stringy. And
Very good.
so Asia is a little bit challenging for us, which brings up the point. Yesterday, we went out to breakfast at this place called Bagels and Eggs, and it's like, oh my God, a bagel, an egg. Westerners, people speaking English, and it was like we recognize that we need to be around that environment
Yes.
at least every once in a while. We can handle foreign and uncomfortable for a bit, but we do need to have access to a good hamburger, some good French fries. I love a good steak, but finding good steak in certain countries is very, very difficult.
Wow.
And so it's very, very challenging. I mean, in Bali, we loved the food there. It had a Western flair to it, and it had an Asian flair to it. After we're done here in Vietnam, we're going to Malaysia, and Malaysia, from what they tell us, is Malay food, Chinese food, and Indian food. And Indian food is not like our top three or anything else like that. So, but fortunately, it's a very contemporary, very modern country. So, our belief is that we're going to find a lot of Western food there too.
So with bagels and eggs, what animal do the eggs come from?
Well, in our case, hopefully they came from chickens, but they will eat duck eggs everywhere, and eggs from different types of animals for sure, and including eggs that still have the poor little baby chicken inside that you just break open and eat the skeleton of it, just like you would eat a sardine.
You're
You know,
tuned to Travel Rich Radio.
you have to appreciate the fact that in America, in the Western world, we are very, very spoiled. We go to a grocery store, we have access to thousands, tens of thousands of different types of foods. When people have to eat what is grown around them, or what they can culture, or what they can raise, or anything else like that, they learn to get by. We did a bicycle trip last week along the Mekong River, and we traveled about 10 kilometers down this concrete walkway that was all broken and shattered and everything. But these people are living back there in virtual shacks, but they have learned how to incorporate all the different vegetation around them. And even though Anthony Bourdain would eat the bark off of a tree, I'm not gonna. I don't have to.
Okay, you're tuned to Travel It's Radio now in our 13th season with Dan Schlossberg and Roger Noriega. Check us out on iTunes, LinkedIn, Instagram, or the Travel It's Radio Facebook page, among other places. And we're talking to travel writer Norm Bour, who got up early in Vietnam just to talk to us.
Yes, thank you.
And Travel It's Radio.
Just for you.
No, I love trains, trolleys, streetcars, funiculars, monorails, anything that runs on tracks. And we've all seen pictures of people riding on the roofs of train cars in India. Have you ridden trains in your travels? Anything from the Mount Washington cog to steam locomotives in Myanmar? Norm?
We may have lost Norm. It looks like he may be frozen.
I think that woman from North Vietnam got to him.
Possibly, yes.
Anyway, you see the picture of the train behind me. That's a virtual picture, virtual background that I put up. How do we get Norm reactivated?
Well, hopefully he'll realize that he is having a difficulty. He'll exit and have to come back in. So, ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize. We are having an international long distance issue. So hopefully we'll be able to get back to a moment. Dan, if you can, yes. All right, Dan, can you go ahead and discuss one of your books real quick that you have for sale and where you can get those books at while we look on getting Norm back?
Okay, well, my books can be found on my website, which is danschlossberg.net, which is on the screen. And they're all baseball books. So I'm working on one now called Home Run King, The Remarkable Record of Hank Aaron. That's going to come out in the spring. And last year's book was Baseball's Memorable Misses, an unabashed look at the game's most incredible zeros, things that you think happened in baseball but never did. And I've written biographies with Milo Hamilton, Al Clark, Ron Bloomberg, and here's Norm Bour back in action again. Back from Vietnam. We thought the woman from North Vietnam got to you.
Yes.
Are you frozen again, Norm?
It's very possible, yes. There might be quite a bit of traffic, and we do apologize, ladies and gentlemen, for the connection. So, Norm, we may have lost you once again, and hopefully we're able to get you back real soon. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the issue with live internet. So we ask you to bear with us as we work through this. It has been a wonderful conversation up until now, and we're looking forward to be able to resolve these issues. And there he is. He is back. Hi, Norm. We apologize, Norm.
And I apologize.
My last question to you was: what kinds of trains have you ridden? You must have ridden quite a few different kinds.
We have, and I have to tell you, until we started traveling, I had not been on a train in literally decades, because in California we ride on cars, we don't ride on trains.
Right.
Unless you're in a big city doing subways and metros and different things like that, we rarely have any occasion to do a train. So when we went to Spain and had a chance to ride these 300-kilometer-mile-an-hour super trains that went from Barcelona to Madrid in a couple of hours, dude, that spun my world. And so I love trains. We haven't been on like the steam trains or anything really exotic or anything else like that. And we have not been on a train where we have to ride on the roof. And when we go to India, if that is the case, so here's what we found: is you just get a first class ticket. Because if you get a first class ticket, you'll get a prime seat inside with air conditioning. It's the people who are obviously very poor, the regular people who are citizens there. They ride what they can as they can. Maybe they pay, maybe they don't pay. But I love train travel. I really do. We haven't done it in a while because where we've been over the last year is just not train country. Eastern Europe does not have much in the way of train travel. And where we've been so far in Asia doesn't have real good train travel yet, but we will soon.
What about streetcars and trolleys?
What's that?
Streetcars and trolleys. You must have seen those. Trams.
Yes, and here's a confession to make. I'm a little bit intimidated by public transportation. When it comes to buses, Pardon me. When it comes to buses, I don't have too much of a problem going from city A to city B because I can get the ticket in advance and know exactly where I'm going and how long it's going to take. But when it comes to taking a bus to go to the museum or taking a bus to go to the river or taking a bus to go to here, unless I really know where I'm going, I'm intimidated by it. And this is my own hang up as a baby boomer. This is where the millennials they excel because they'll get on something and if they screw it up, no big deal. They'll get off and they'll try it again. So when it comes to trolley cars, when it comes to inner city buses and various things like that, I don't do them as much as I should, and I need to get better at it because it's obviously a more practical way. But what we do have is we have ride sharing here. Throughout most of the world, you have Uber type of car services, which are ridiculously cheap, a fraction of what you would pay in the U.S. You could pay five U.S. dollars to get 40 miles, whereas in the United States that might be
Wow.
a $50 ride share ride.
Yeah.
You must have stories about planes too. So let's ask again about your favorite and least favorite airlines, foreign and domestic.
Um, you know, there's horror stories out there of travelers who have had all kinds of problems with airlines and missed flights and canceled flights and all these various things like that. And again, we have been very, very blessed and very, very fortunate. I'll share an experience that's a good experience. Right as COVID was hitting, we were here in Europe, excuse me, in Asia, excuse me, and we had to go back to the United States for my wife's son's wedding. So we get back to Ohio in March of 2020, just as COVID is really hitting.
Yep.
So we're in Ohio for 2 days. President Trump says, pardon me, we're closing the border to Mexico. We're supposed to be leaving for Mexico in 2 weeks. So we hightailed it out of there 2 days later, and we were the only ones on the plane. We had a 727 all to ourselves from
Wow.
Ohio to Cancun. Again, I so apologize, gentlemen, and to
Not at
all
all.
of our
Thank
listeners.
you. We know you're not feeling well. So no, thank you.
So
Roger, the next question.
as far as favorite airlines, none of the airlines have been good. I love Emirates. I've only flown them a few times, but there's been none that have been like really horrible.
It's good to know. Are your travels mostly foreign, domestic, or both? And that's
Almost
from
all foreign.
yeah.
Almost all foreign. I mean, the only time in the last 5 years, the only time I've come back is I had a business relationship with a company in the US that I would come back and do some video marketing for. So I had occasion to come back 2 or 3 times a year. But because of time and relationships changing and distance and everything, that has kind of diminished. So to the point of where we were back in the US in September for about 3 weeks between Ohio, California, and Hawaii. But we don't really have much reason to go back to the U.S. except for her kids. Now, with that being said, I have an American Airlines credit card, and so what was nice is that all of our trips, we had I think 11 trips, 11 flights scheduled over about a 5 week period, and they were all covered with my travel points, so that worked out really well.
Heck yeah. Now I already asked you the $64,000 question. The $69,000 question is any stories that you would care to share about your most embarrassing incident as a travel journalist?
Um, I thought about that question because you prepped me in advance, and there's certainly been some embarrassing situations, but probably one of the most embarrassing situation is when I put us on the wrong bus going between Heathrow Airport and Gatwick Airport.
Oh wow.
So we found a flight going back to the United States from wherever we were in Europe. And the reason it was so cheap is because you had to land at Gatwick, which is kind of like their version of the low carrier airline airport, and then Heathrow, which of course is the major international. And it's a shuttle ride that takes about 45 minutes to an hour, right?
Yeah.
And so we get to Gatwick, we get there about 11 o'clock at night. Our plan is to take a shuttle to Heathrow because we're leaving the next day, and found out that the shuttles don't operate until 6 o'clock the next morning. So
Um,
we're sleeping on the floor at Gatwick. And, not the first time we have slept on the floor at airline terminals, probably half a dozen or more times. And it's just, the cost of doing business. But the problem is that when we came back, we had to do the reverse. We landed at Heathrow, and then we had a shuttle to go to back to Gatwick, and I put us on the wrong shuttle bus. So we're on the shuttle bus for like 45 minutes an hour, and my wife is saying, "This does not look familiar." And come to find out that I put us on the wrong bus. So instead of having hours and hours just of time to spare, we had to get off at a town called Winchester. We had to take like three trains and then go to all this kind of rigmarole. So I've done embarrassing things like that where it's a logistical thing where you just plain have a boneheaded move where you get on the wrong thing at the wrong time, but it's not as bad as someone who's going to Australia and they end up landing in Austria. We care about people doing things like that. People
Yes.
people do things like that, guys. They do it all the time.
Yeah, I've heard about that. That's crazy. So I have to ask, how did you decide to become a travel journalist? And obviously, did it happen by accident?
Mm,
The accidental tourist?
yeah, it's kind of interesting because it was not really planned. I didn't start writing until fairly late in my life, in my 50s. Most of my career was in residential real estate, and I had my own radio show in the early 2000s for about half a dozen years. And I started writing for the local newspaper on the real estate industry in Southern California because it was going berserkers. Prices were going up, foreclosures were happening. It was like a tumultuous time. So I started writing for the newspapers. And then as I started getting older, I recognized that sometimes you have to reinvent yourself. And I had to reinvent myself after leaving a 27-year marriage and 27 years in my house. So I started writing a column for a local newspaper on what's it like reinventing yourself as a single guy at the age of 59. And then I started writing for a trade magazine, and I started writing for a couple of little things with no specific pattern, no specific trend. And then when we started our journeys, that's when I started reaching out specifically to the travel industry. And of course, I did it all for free. You have to give before you get. And so I can't say it happened intentionally, but it did happen by design. And so when we left 5 years ago, my plan, quote unquote, my plan was to have a library of different travel books, each generating a little bit of royalty income and sharing our experiences, and that would be used to supplement our lifestyle. And that's pretty much the way it's working out.
Thank you. You touched on it a bit, but what kind of work did you do before, if I may ask?
I started as a real estate agent when I was in my mid 20s, and I
Wow.
did that in financial services for a long time. And then in 2008, most of us remember this major recession that kicked our asses.
Hmm.
And that changed my life in a big way. So for about 4 years ago, I stopped doing real estate and mortgages, and I worked as a consultant, helping businesses reinvent myself. And so that was kind of like my thing. I'm a big believer of reinventing yourself at any age, whether it be in your personal life or in your business. And then I happened to get into a niche industry in 2013, and I started consulting in that, and that's kind of gone by the wayside. So I've done a lot of different things over the years, but for the most part, I'm retired and I write what I can when I can and travel as we want to.
Travel Itch fans, we're talking to travel writer Norm Bauer.
One great fear Americans have is becoming ill or injured on the road. Did that ever happen to you?
You mean like now?
Oh, sorry.
Like now, losing my voice while I'm doing an amazing interview with two really cool guys.
Thank you.
Again, we have been very lucky, and here's what people also need to understand about international travel. The cost of medical services in the United States is just insane. You can't do anything without breaking the bank. But when you travel outside the United States, you can get a lot of things done overseas. Like case in point, my wife had dental implants in Croatia. In the United States, that would cost her 5 grand. In Croatia, it cost her $1,500. I had a bridge put in Mexico for $1,000. Probably would have cost three times that. Twice we have had occasions where she had to be called to the emergency ward. She had a vertigo attack in Portugal outside of Lisbon to the point of where she just fell over and she got nauseous and come to find out that she just had some crystals that kind of broke free in her head. So the paramedics came, took her to the emergency ward. She's in the emergency ward for a couple hours. After a while, they gave her IVs. They gave her some drugs to take with her. They wheel her out. I take her back to the hotel we were staying. That's 105 euros, guys. It's 105 euros. No paperwork other than here's your receipt for what you paid. And then when we were in Thailand in a town called Chiang Mai, she got COVID. We didn't even know it was COVID at the time because they didn't have a name for it. It was the second week of January of 2020.
Mhm.
But we had to take her to the hospital. Paramedics came. So you can imagine how challenging it was me trying to call 911 in Thai because I don't even know if it's 911. It's actually a different number. But I was able to get through. The paramedics came, took her to the hospital. She's in there for a couple hours, hook her up to, half a dozen different tests and different IVs, send her home with a bunch of medications. And it was a $250.
Yeah.
It's $250 for that. Now in the United States, that would have been a ridiculous thousands of dollars. And so medical tourism, I'm going to make this pitch for people who are interested. Medical tourism is a huge, huge thing. So if you're in the United States and you need to get some type of surgery done, in many cases, you can travel to a country that specializes in that. Cover your trip, cover your lodging, get the surgery done, get a vacation out of it, and spend less than you would have had you gone to your local hospital.
Wow.
Do you travel alone? I mean, you mentioned your wife usually goes with you. And do you split up the work, such as photography, transcription, that kind of stuff?
We do travel together. There's been a few times where I've traveled by myself when she went back to spend time with her grandson, and I went on my own to Ecuador, and then we met up in Peru. But no, we are joined at the hip, which is a challenge because being together 24/7, as much as we have, we're together all the time. So sometimes we need a little bit of space apart. And so she also is a writer. She loves coffee shops, so she'll go to a Starbucks type coffee shop and she'll chill down there. Me, I like to work right here in my room. This is much more comfortable for me, so that way we get a little bit of time apart. But for the most part, we travel together.
I have to ask about driving in foreign countries, especially in places where custom dictates you drive on the left, as in London, or in places where nobody pays attention to the rules of the road.
All right, so I'll address one and then the other. Driving on the left-hand road was challenging at first, and I don't think I've ever driven a car on the left-hand side of the road, but I've driven a motorcycle on the left-hand side of the road in several countries: Thailand, Bali, where we just came from, a couple of other countries that we've been, Australia, where we drove on the left-hand side of the road. That was a good-sized Ducati, but I've never driven a car on the left-hand side of the road. And the other part of that question was what now?
I asked you
Where
about places where nobody pays attention to the rules of the road.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean like right
Anywhere.
out, you mean like right outside of my door. All right,
Yeah.
so I got to talk to you about the motor scooter bike situation in Asia. All right, you see these pictures of people riding along with 5 children on a motor scooter, or they're carrying the equivalent of their week's groceries on the back, or they have a small greenhouse with them. The things that people carry on their motor scooters, and these are small scooters, 115, 125cc scooters, is just mind blowing. They'll carry ladders, they'll carry blocks, they'll carry bags of concrete. They'll carry water bottles, they'll carry their children. Yeah, like 8 water bottles all together. And so when we first got to Bali, my plan was we were going to rent a scooter for a month. But when I saw the way they drive, it's like, no freaking way. I'm not going to put my life on the line out there. And here's what's different is that they drive without necessarily looking where they're going, but they watch out for each other. They're like little bees going in and out, just like in Amsterdam with the bicycles. But for the most part, they're very safe drivers. And we noticed that when we got to the Bali airport because we had some friends who picked us up and we were in a car going through that. And I said, don't you feel weird? Don't you feel uncomfortable driving, with all this traffic? And to her, this was just another day at the office. So it's like what you get used to. But for me personally, I like driving a scooter, but I'm not going to drive if I feel in danger, if I'm going to put my life on the line, or if I'm not going to enjoy it. It's easier for me just to take a taxi or take a Grab or take an Uber or something like that. So traffic in different parts of the world is definitely challenging sometimes.
Do you attend IMM, IPW, or other travel industry events?
We have not yet. I was actually planning to attend an event in Berlin last September, but the logistics didn't work out because we weren't going to be back to Europe in time. But for the most part, I don't attend very many trade shows, or any trade shows for that matter.
And what new projects are in the work for Norm Bauer?
Say that again, please.
What new projects are in the work for Norm Bauer? That's you.
I got that. What new projects? To be honest with you, every day is a project. Every country is a new experience. We we talk about this repeatedly because we live a life that sounds like a fantasy, but the truth is that anyone can do it if they're willing to give up certain things. And people say, "Oh, you're so lucky, you're so lucky." Well, luck really didn't have anything to do with it. This was a choice. And so when we travel, like for instance, we're traveling to Malaysia, and the plan was to be there for a couple months because we thought she may need cataract surgery, but she may not, so we might not stay for as long. So when we go to a new country, that is our new project. Where do we go? How long do we stay? Do we stay in the city? Do we stay out of the city? Do we get something big, something small? We want to stay within our budget. And then what do we do from there? So because we're going to be in Asia for, for the most part for the rest of this year, we have a general itinerary of going to Malaysia and then going north to Thailand and then going east back to Vietnam, to northern Vietnam, and then possibly up to Hong Kong and Korea and Japan. So we have a very broad sketch of where we want to go, but that's part of the adventure. There are times when we want to stick around for a while because it can take its toll on us, especially when you're packing and unpacking all the time. But we normally get itchy feet after about a couple of weeks sometimes, or a couple of months, and we're like ready to move on. So we both have a very similar patience level when it comes to moving on to different places.
We're talking to travel writer Norm Bauer.
If you would please tell our audience about your work in the media, from newspapers and magazines to radio, TV, and online sites.
Absolutely. Now, this did happen by accident. Back in the early 2000s, I used to listen to a radio show on one of the very, very major talk radio stations, and it was on financial planning. Doug Fabian, his name was. So I used to listen to a guy named Doug Fabian, and he was a financial planner. And they were planning a 3-day cruise out of Los Angeles down to Mexico, and it would be a chance to like be part of a financial planning cruise and be part of Doug's show. And I thought this sounds like a really good way to combine business with pleasure. So my then wife, my ex-wife, we went on that little cruise, and I got to meet the producer of the show. His name was Michael. And so Michael and I just hit it off. We were both Geminis, so we both just hit it off famously. And he said, "So where do you live?" And I told him. He says, "Our radio studio is right where you live. It's like 5 minutes from your house." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, maybe come on down." And I've always been enamored with media. I was a movie and television junkie in my youth, as the reference to Ed Clutch, Nick Two at the beginning of our conversation, and big Twilight Zone fan. So I was raised on television. I mean, I was an only child raised on Saturday morning cartoons and sitcoms of the 60s and what have you. So to cut to the chase here, so I went in and I sat in on the radio show. And he said, you really should consider doing a segment on Doug's show, because his show was on financial planning and he would get calls on mortgages, and Doug didn't know anything about mortgages. So I did what they called the mortgage minute. So I paid for a 2-minute spot on his show, and and I basically say, "Hi, this is Norm Bauer. I'm here to tell you about this week's mortgage rates and what's happening in the market and everything." And it did great. And then came the time Michael said, "You need your own show." And I said, "I am not ready to do my own show," because I didn't have the confidence. And I said, "But I have a friend. His name was also Michael. Who's a financial planner. And he and I have known each other for years. Maybe he'd be interested in joining me." So that's what we did. We did the Norman Mike Real Estate and Finance Show. And we took calls on real estate, finances, financial planning, estate planning, and we did live workshops, and we sold products, and we traveled to different cities. We were syndicated on 6 different cities at the time, and we did that for a long time until the recession hit, and then it made it impractical. And then I started a podcast in a niche industry, and now I do interviews like this. I'm both the interviewer and the interviewee. I love interviewing people on both sides, and I love sharing travel related stories.
I did hear you on radio here in Southern California. I'm certain of it now. Tell us about your books and where we can find them.
Absolutely. So the book I'm most proud of right now is called Nomadic Travel for All Ages. And this is a condensation of our travels. Basically, it starts at the beginning. How do you get ready emotionally, financially, spiritually, to leave a country that you've lived in for at that time 64 years? How do you leave your friends? How do you walk away with nothing with other than a couple of backpacks? And it talks about what's it like waking up in a foreign city where everyone's speaking a different language and you don't know what the hell's going on. And I still remember the first couple of days in Spain, in Valencia. I'm watching television and I have no idea what he's saying. I'm looking at the newspaper, I have no idea what it's saying, and it felt like really weird to me. But now it gets to the point of where we can be in any country at any time, in any situation, and we recognize that most of the time we don't recognize what's going on. So when we hear English, it's like, hey, English. And so we have built a relationship or relationships with lots and lots of nomadic people all over the world, because we could be in a coffee shop in Albania or a coffee shop in Romania or at a restaurant here or walking down the street and we'll hear someone speak English. It's like, oh, where are you from and how long have you been traveling? And one thing led to another. It's like yesterday I mentioned that we had breakfast at a bagel shop and they were both Canadian. And so we actually walked with them down to their hotel rooms and we spent like 2 hours with them and we got to know each other. And one of the couples was actually related to the other. They were the in laws of the other couple and we were sharing travel stories, and now we are going to be friends possibly forever. So we have developed really. We had a call last night with some friends that we met in Romania who are now in Bali, and we were just kind of comparing notes. How are you doing? What are you finding? What's been your experiences? And so there's a nomadic community that is much larger than you would expect. They're not all digital nomads. There's a lot of the whole digital nomad thing gets a lot of play, which are the young nomads that are out on their laptops on the beach in Bali. But there's a lot of middle age and senior nomads, older than us even, who are traveling all over the world. Some who have second homes, some who just travel independently, and they just live the life that they choose. And they're going to keep going until they don't want to or can't go anymore.
I thank you for that. I've been seeing some of those channels myself. And this question would apply to me. What advice would you give to anyone planning international travel in 2024 or beyond?
Absolutely do it. Look,
Yes.
the two things that I always advise people is you have to be patient because things aren't always going to be working out exactly the way you want, and you have to be flexible. I mean, when we first started, I still remember going through passport control and feeling like I had contraband in my luggage because I felt weird going through, oh my god, the immigration man. But after a while it's like it's no big deal. So the things that are scary at first become every day after a while. And so absolutely do it. um, I would say look at the country or countries that have always intrigued you, and don't just go for a week. There's a big difference between being a tourist and being a traveler, because when you're being a tourist, you have to go somewhere, you have to eat as much of the elephant as you can in a short period of time, and then you go back to your life. If you can build it into your schedule to take at least 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe as long as 6 weeks. Go to a particular country, stay in maybe two or three different locations, and really feel what the culture is in that country. Feel what the people are like, what the food is like, what the ambiance and the environment is like, and everything. And it'll give you a whole sense of self. We as Americans, we think that the world revolves around us because America has been the world leader for the last 200 years. That is now questionable right now. And of course, we're not going to get into that. But when you go to other parts of the world, America is just another country out there, another one of 180 some countries. They have their own politics, they have their own challenges, they have their own complaining about their politicians. And so the world doesn't revolve around us. And so, and when you realize how young as a country we are, the first real experience I had with this was when we were in Tivoli, Italy. It was our second visitation. Tivoli is a small medieval town outside of Rome, about 20 minutes east. We were staying in this little cave. That's what we call it, is the cave, because it was really nothing more than one room, a sleeping area, and a little kitchen. This building was 500 years old. This building was older than the United States of America. We
Wow.
could walk right down the street, and there was a bridge there that was older than Rome. This particular town, which is called Tivoli, was actually the summer retreat of the Roman rulers, and it was actually 600 years older than Rome. So when you put things in context, when you go to Egypt and you look at these mummies, they're real. When you look at these pyramids, they're real. They're 3,000 friggin' years old. It's like how people did this, how they had the technology, how they had the wisdom, aside from aliens, of course, how they could do all these things. It just blows you away what we as humankind have done. And here we are for however many decades, however many years we have on the planet. So we should learn to live the life that we choose. We're very fortunate. We're, in our 70s, we're close to it. And we both, for the most part, have our health, but there are people who are younger than us who don't have good health, who have passed already. And so we look at every day as a blessing. And I think that everyone should look at that in their own life. Do the life that you want to do and try not to stress about things that you can't control, which is almost everything.
Norm, that is most enlightening. Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add that we haven't asked?
Other than the fact that I've tremendously enjoyed this conversation with you guys,
Thank
I
you.
just want to say thank you and thank your audience. There's a couple of motorcycle riders that asked questions that we
Yes.
didn't get to, and I'm sorry to disappoint you. I am not a Harley guy. Um, I am not. I'm a sports touring guy because when I was in the United States, I was more of a sports tourer. And when we rented bikes in Europe, we normally go with BMWs because they're more conducive to longer rides. I mean, for the last 2 summers, we spent 88 and 87 days each year on a motorcycle. And last summer, we were in 30 different rooms over 87 days on our
Wow.
BMW 620, and it was lovely. We went through 6 different countries. We started in Romania and went to Hungary and Slovenia and Croatia, and we did a circuit and everything. And we saw beauty that you just can't even describe. I mean, my wife is an amazing photographer, and we take pictures, we take videos, but we look at it and we say, we just can't capture that beauty. We just can't capture it. So again, my advice would be learn how to travel younger. Go to travelyounger.com, sign up for my newsletter. I stay in touch with everyone through my blog. I'm big on Facebook. I'm not a big Instagrammer or TikTok guy, but my name, Norm Bour, under Facebook, and Travel Younger, the group, under Facebook. And, if anyone wants to know where we are, you can just take a click and say, oh, they're in Malaysia now. They're not liking it, or they're liking it, or whatever the case might be.
Wow.
Okay, our guest tonight has been travel writer and author and radio guy Norm Bour. Thank you for getting up early, especially with that hoarse throat. And thank you
Oh,
for being our guest on Travelwitch Radio.
my pleasure, gentlemen. Have a great day, or a great night.
And that's it for this edition of Travelwitch Radio. Now, this is Dan Schlossberg along with Roger Noriega saying thank you for your time this time. Until next time, next week, we'll talk to Jennifer Tepper in New York about 54 Below and the Museum of Broadway. For now, good night and stay safe. And let's see if I can figure out how to do the music and play. Trying to get it to play anyway. Aha, there we go.